Okay, everybody can see? Everybody can see it? Okay, good morning, and I want to thank Jen for inviting me here. My name is Evan Weiner. I have not done this talk in about 6 years since I'm on a cruise ship, but I think I know enough about the Dodgers and Walter O'Malley, and no booze on O'Malley, huh? Or Horace Stoneham, or John Wayne. And John Wayne is part of this talk, actually. It's California sports and how things changed in California. I don't know if they changed for the better or the worse, but they changed. Of course, that's Yogi and me and Brian Cashman. Brian Cashman's been with the Yankees forever, general manager. And of course, I don't have to introduce Yogi to you, right? Did play in LA. And he was part of the 1963 Yankees that lost to the Dodgers. Remember when Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale and Johnny Padres beat the Yankees in '63? And of course, Vin Scully comes from the Bronx, the Dodgers announcer. California, here I come. Right back where I started from, the old Al Jolson song. California is interesting because this is where entertainment and sports meet. You could say it happened in New York as well with the Take Me Out to the Ball Game when Hopper, the Wolf Hopper, performed before Chicago White Stockings and New York Giants players did the Take Me Out to the Ball Game, not Take Me Out to the Ball Game, Casey at the Bat. California, here we come, but not so fast. The St. Louis Browns were supposed to be playing in Los Angeles in 1942. They planned to go to Los Angeles with a meeting on December 8th, 1941, scheduled by the American League owners. The day before, Pearl Harbor is bombed, and that kind of ended the American League stab at Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Coliseum commissioners told Daniel Reeves, a New Yorker who owned the Cleveland Rams in 1945, he lost $40,000, and he decided he was going to move to either LA or Dallas. He decided on LA because he saw a pot of gold. But the Coliseum Commission told him, if you want to have your Rams play in Los Angeles, Coliseum was built by federal and state funds. Guess what? You can't have a segregated team. And in those days, in 1945, from 1933 to 1945, the NFL had no black players. Recognize this guy, take a good look at him.
John Wayne.
John Wayne. He's a football player. He's an offensive tackle with USC. And he apparently had some problems with the coaching staff. USC players used to hang around movie lots as extras, and they're always looking for big, brawny guys, and obviously he was a big, brawny guy. By the time it's 1927, and he's kind of kicked off the USC football team, University of Southern California, and he's in a film called The Dropkick. He was in 140 films or so. His biggest moment, he won the Best Oscar in 1969 for True Grit. But there he is as a football player, and there he is in True Grit. And how he became an actor, couldn't be a football player. Got kicked off the football team. Marion Morrison and a few of his other teammates from USC started to work part-time at Fox Studios, which was called Fox Film Corp during his college days. He played on the freshman team at USC, and he was on the varsity team as a sophomore. Legend has it that he broke his collarbone while body surfing at Newport Beach before his junior year. And because of that, he had his football scholarship taken away from him right before the junior year was supposed to start. So what is he supposed to do? He's not playing any football, and apparently he's not much of a student, so he goes into acting full time. The Los Angeles Coliseum was built for the 1932 Olympics. It was not built for professional football. In fact, professional football. The Coliseum decided we're not going to have any professional football teams ever play in the Coliseum. It was going to be for the Olympics, and it was going to be for USC. And today, it is still for the Olympics, although I think most of the 2028 Olympics will be held at the Rams Stadium, and also for USC football. The LA Coliseum was the host to USC. It was dedicated in 1923 to Los Angeles County veterans, and it was rededicated to those who served in the Great War. It's hosted 2 Olympics. The selection of the host city for the 1932 Summer Olympics was made at the IOC's 23rd session. There was only one bid, which kind of history repeats itself again in 1984, and just recently, only one bid for the Olympics, Los Angeles, the years they ended up getting it. Was selected by default to host the 1932 games, the 1984 games, and the 2028 games basically will be in Los Angeles also by default. There was a football team, American Football League team, called the Los Angeles Wildcats. And they came about because of Red Grange. Now, how many New York Giants football fans are here? You, that's it? What teams do you root for?
Not a football fan.
Not football. How many non-football fans are here? 1, 2, 3. And what are the rest of who? Anybody root for the Jets, Jets?
Nope.
Woody Johnson be happy. Anybody root for any other football teams?
Niners.
The Niners.
Cowboys.
The Cowboys. The Cowboys. And what was yours? Cowboys. How could you be a Cowboy fan in Rye when Wellington Mara lived down the street?
Of course, my son was a fan.
Your son was a fan. You know Wellington.
I don't want to hear anything.
Oh, you know Wellington Mara, the owner of the Giants, literally lived down the street from
Down
here.
the street.
Yeah. Anyway, this is an American Football League team, the LA Wildcats, who came about because of the New York Giants, believe it or not. In 1925, the New York Giants started, first season. Tim Mara, a bootlegger, a bookie, invested $500 into the team. But the team wasn't doing very well. In fact, it was almost out of business until the Chicago Bears signed Red Grange to a contract illegally, according to the NFL, because he was still playing in college and he was supposed to let his college eligibility run out, but when money talks, right? The Bears scheduled an exhibition game against the New York Giants. In 1925 at the Polo Grounds, over 70,000 people came out to see that game, and it saved the New York Giants. Well, Tim Mara had enough money for the next year. Red Grange wanted a team in the National Football League in 1926. They said no. So his agent, Cash and Carry Pyle, C.C. Pyle, said, let's start a new league. And they did. And the first professional team in L.A., football team, was the LA Wildcats because of the American Football League. The Grange team had a 5-year lease at Yankee Stadium, but the league would fold. The first NFL team in the Los Angeles area was a team called the Los Angeles Buccaneers that never played a game in Los Angeles. And the Wildcats never played a game in Los Angeles. They were traveling teams. The Los Angeles Buccaneers team was made up of players from Chicago. And they had some California players, but the team was based in Chicago. This is Playa del Rey, and this is where they played some football back in the day. The LA Buccaneers did play 2 home games in LA, exhibition games against the New York Yankees at Red Grange, and they played their last 2 games of their existence up in San Francisco. Newt Rockne, any college football fans here? What team?
Notre Dame.
Oh, so you know about this guy.
A little bit.
A little bit. Newt Rockne. Newt Rockne, of course, was a great football coach who got killed in a plane crash. Notre Dame and USC, you watch that game every year, right? Yeah, you watch that game every year. Well, that started back in 1926. Between 1928 and 1932, those teams won 5 championships. There was talk about ending the series between the 2 teams because it took an enormous amount of time to go from LA to South Bend, Indiana by train. But Newt Rockne said, we got to play the game because he wanted to recruit players from California. And he said that one day every team is going to play on the East Coast or the West Coast, and they're going to get there by plane. Planes would change California sports. Ironically enough, Knute Rockne died in a plane crash in 1931. Now, I talked about Hollywood and football and baseball as well, but I'm talking about football right now. How many of you remember the song, "You Gotta Be a Football Hero to Get All the Girls"? Nobody?
I missed it.
Nobody? This is by Al Sherman, Buddy Fields, and Al Lewis. You gotta be a football hero. They played that in Popeye cartoons. You gotta be a football hero. And you gotta be a football hero like these guys. You guys must know who these guys are. The Marx Brothers. Zeppo, Groucho, Harpo, and Chico. Hollywood embraced college football and the game of football in the 1930s, as did cartoons, which helped spread the popularity of football. Of course, this movie was a farce, but then again, most Marx Brothers movies were. Mickey scored the touchdown. And you gotta be a football hero to get all the beautiful girls. That's where the song was actually done. And they were fighting over her. Olive oil. Popeye. Early Hollywood movies on football were based on the college game. Horse feathers. Horse feathers. I give talks on the business of sports, politics of business of sports, to college students. And I say one of the requisites, before you come in to actually watch me speak, you have to watch this movie that is now 90 years old, because it harpooned college sports back in 1932, and nothing has changed. The basic plot of the movie is the Groucho character. Quincy Adams Wagstaff is the new president of Huxley College, and he's looking for the best football players, and he's going to buy the best football players because Huxley University has not beaten Darwin forever. So he goes down to a speakeasy to look for the best two football players who are around. And of course he finds Chico and Harpo, Baravelli and Pinky. And they would ultimately help their school win the big game. Mickey Mouse, Popeye, subjects of two cartoons. This is Gilmore Stadium, where the Pacific Coast League teams in the LA area played. Gilmore Stadium then and Gilmore Stadium today. Price is Right. Let's Make a Deal. And the Corden Show, which is going off in soap operas. The field was abandoned and somebody decided to build a studio for television, CBS. And so now you get The Price is Right. The Los Angeles Bulldogs played there. And they were an independent team. And they were around from approximately 1934 to 1948. Most of their games played at that stadium, which is now, because sometimes I get women in the audience for this on cruise ships, and you got to tell them The Price is Right was there. The NFL actually admitted the Bulldogs into their league in 1937. But then they figured out, hey, how are we going to get there? We got to take a train. That's going to take forever, and then the guys got to get back. So that would be that. But the NFL didn't give up on Los Angeles. The first two All-Star games that it played, 38-39, was in Los Angeles. It's Kenny Washington, probably one of the greatest football players you never heard of. Anybody hear of him? He was in the same backfield as Jackie Robinson at USC. But there was a color barrier that was put up. But the Pacific Coast Football League did not have a color barrier. And Jackie Robinson played in that league, and Woody Strode played in that league, and Kenny Washington played in that league.
Woody Strode, the actor.
The actor.
Yeah.
The actor. Jackie Robinson played for the Bulldogs as well. Blacks could play in that league. It was the only professional league they could play in at the time because the National Football League put up a color barrier. After serving in the military in 1944, Jackie Robinson returned to the Bulldogs. His football career ends with an ankle injury. First play of the game against the San Diego Bombers. Kenny Washington also played in that league with Hollywood as well. The league would fold after there were two teams in the Los Angeles Coliseum in 1946, the All-America Conference Los Angeles Dons and the Rams. Okay, Jolt and Joe, how many baseball fans are here? We got more
tennis
baseball
and a
fans.
hockey fan.
What?
I'm tennis and hockey.
I'll get to you in a minute, or two, or three. So how many Yankee fans are here? Okay, how many actually saw this guy play? Because it's been 71 years since he played. Where have you gone, Joe DiMaggio? Right? In song. The last great baseball song, right, is Mrs. Robinson, because where have you gone? But before Joe was a Yankee, he wore pinstripes. But the pinstripes he wore, the San Francisco Seals. He was from San Francisco. The Pacific Coast League was successful, very successful in a lot of ways, and it failed in other ways. Los Angeles and San Francisco were growing cities. But because of travel concerns, Major League Baseball, the National League, and the American League were uninterested in going to LA. The DiMaggio brothers played in San Francisco. Vince, Joe, and Dom. Now, in my career, I got to interact with Joe and Dom. Any Joe DiMaggio fans in here? You are. I'm going to disappoint you. He had nothing to say. Whereas Dom, who was called the Little Professor, Dominic DiMaggio, was the guy, if you wanted to get stories, you went to him. I was in San Francisco a couple of years, 3 years ago now, and there's a big building where the DiMaggio restaurant was, and it's now called the Dom DiMaggio building. And I looked at my wife, I said, you know, I knew him before he was a building. Joe DiMaggio played for the San Francisco Seals between 1932 and 1935. And San Francisco Seals had a lot of good players. Frankie Crosetti, who ended up shortstop with the Yankees, and the third base coach, Lefty Gomez, who is a really good pitcher with the Yankees, ended up there. Earl Averill, Paul Wainer, Lefty O'Doul, all Hall of Famers, also played with San Francisco. Apparently the San Francisco baseball team knew players and how to get them. And they were around for about 55 years. They were the predominant force of West Coast baseball during an era where all the teams, 16 teams, National League, American League, 11 cities, all east of the Mississippi River. They won 14 championships, and they launched the careers of people like Joe DiMaggio. Was it a third major league? Well, some of the old timers told me you can make more money playing in the Pacific Coast League than you could play and make in the American and National League. Ralph Kiner once told me when the Pittsburgh Pirates, where's my Ralph Kiner friend here? He's not here today. Oh, you are. You remember Ralph?
Yeah.
Did you ever get your car back?
Yeah, I got it.
Get it back. Ralph told me that when Gene Baker, who was the first Negro player who played with the Pittsburgh Pirates, made $2,000 one year. You can make a lot more money in the Pacific Coast League than $2,000. The Seals started in 1903. Henry Harris was the owner, and he led an effort to break away from the Pacific Coast League. His team was known as the Wasps, the Stars, and then the Seals. There were teams out in Los Angeles, Oakland, Seattle, Sacramento, and Portland, and of course today Los Angeles area has two teams, the Bay Area 2 teams, and Seattle, and Sacramento is close enough to the Bay Area. He also got his start in the Pacific Coast League. The splendid splinter Ted Williams from San Diego, and he signed with the Boston Red Sox. He's a pretty good player, wasn't he? I think he was. Hit 406 in 1941. Last guy to hit over 400. But the St. Louis Browns, that baseball team, which nobody remembers today unless you saw a Brownies game back in 1953, because it was the last year. And when the team was sold to Baltimore interests, the Baltimore Orioles franchise said, we're a new team here. We disavow any of the St. Louis Browns records. And the St. Louis Browns are an orphan team. Nobody claims them now except the Baseball Hall of Fame. But this team in 1941 was headed out to LA. Los Angeles had Hollywood. They would have the NFL eventually. They would have Disneyland and Walt Disney. It would be home to network TV shows, but Los Angeles doesn't become part of the big leagues, a major league city, until 1955 when Walter O'Malley who, when he left Brooklyn in 1957, made the second most amount of money behind the New York Yankees. And in 2021, the Los Angeles Dodgers made the second most amount of money behind the New York Yankees, so things never change. But Pearl Harbor comes about. And Los Angeles and Hollywood, well, the Pacific Coast League could have claimed Major League status, because that's what people did in those days, but they never did. But Donald Barnes, the owner of the St. Louis Browns, said, I'm moving to Los Angeles. And he had everything worked out. And the vote was going to be on December 8th, 1941. It was a day too late. Like I said, Hollywood had stars at that point, like Clark Gable. Barnes had preliminary approval to move to LA. He had promises of bank funding from the Bank of America, which I have a credit card to, and probably most of you have a Bank of America credit card still around. He had a minor league baseball park to use, Wrigley Field. Anybody watch Home Run Derby way back when? Remember the show Home Run Derby, where they have baseball players hit home runs against one another? Well, that was shot in Wrigley Field. That was owned by the Chicago Cubs owner, Phil Wrigley, but he was going to sell the building to Barnes. He was going to handle territorial issues by moving the Los Angeles Angels of the Pacific Coast League down to Long Beach, and that would become the Browns' top farm team. And he had a deal with TWA. He said there's been considerable talk about one club out of St. Louis, taking one club out of St. Louis. I consider Los Angeles the most desirable city for a major league team. Transportation problems could be solved through air travel. And also the rails, the Santa Fe Railroad. And he had all kind of deals. He worked a deal with TWA. He worked a deal with the operators of the Chicago to Los Angeles Santa Fe Railroad. He built a schedule for 1942. And the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team, the owner, Sam Breeden, said, here's $250,000. Get out of here. Leave St. Louis to us. And it was all set to go. But St. Louis kept the team, the Browns. Look at that logo. It's a Brownie, right? Look at that logo. The vote did take place eventually. Each team voted against the move, including the Browns. If you know anything about American history, you know what had happened. Pearl Harbor, the war starts. Hank Greenberg is the first player to enlist in World War II on December 8th, 1941. Rather, 41. The Browns remained in St. Louis, and the team would move to Baltimore in 1954. After World War II, though, look, the war built up Los Angeles, the Oakland Naval Base, San Diego. The war did a lot to make California livable for people from the Midwest who decide, hey, let's go to California. So the president of the Pacific Coast League, a guy by the name of Patch Rowland, said, hey, this could be a third major league. After all, we got LA, we got San Francisco, Seattle, well, Seattle in those days, but Seattle, Portland, we got San Diego, we could fill in with some other cities. Yeah, let's become a major league. But the American League and the National League were not interested in the Pacific Coast League becoming a major league. Not that it had anything to do with it. They were all, the American League and the National League were separate. Oh, notice this guy? It's Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, right.
Humphrey Bogart. A hot dog at the ballpark is better than a steak at the Ritz. Humphrey Bogart was a big fan of the Hollywood stars, the Los Angeles Angels. Meanwhile, something's going on up in Boston that attracts Walter O'Malley's attention. The Boston Braves. Good team. They got Johnny Sain. They got Warren Spahn. They got Eddie Matthews. They got guys in the minor league system like Henry Aaron. But Boston isn't too cozy on the Braves anymore. They're not too cozy on the Red Sox either. Nobody was going to games in either place, but the Red Sox got more people. In March 1953, Lou Perini moved his Boston Braves to Milwaukee, and that begins the mechanism that ultimately would bring Major League Baseball to California, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. Walter O'Malley sees that Perini gets nearly 2 million people at his games. And he's got an aging park in Ebbets Field. I never went to Ebbets Field. Anybody go to Ebbets Field? was in an aging, dilapidated park in the 1950s.
Too young to realize it.
Yeah, well, not whole gang members. Anyway, so he starts looking at this. They got this new stadium, and it's built by Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee. And they got a sweetheart deal. They're hardly paying any rent, and they're keeping virtually all the revenues in the building. And O'Malley, who's got a good TV deal with Channel 9, but he has this aging stadium, is beginning to look, saying, I need a new stadium. Jersey City Dodgers. The Dodgers played 18 games in Jersey City in 1956 and 1957. O'Malley was serious about getting a new stadium. Meanwhile, Horace Stoneham, and that's Horace here. I don't know how many drinks he had in him in the afternoon, but he had a few. Bobby Thompson and Leo DeRocher, after the shot heard around the world when the Giants and Thompson hits the home run and beats the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Giants looking to move. Walter O'Malley starts pushing for a new stadium in Brooklyn. He's offered a stadium in Queens by Robert Moses. And he tells Robert Moses, we're the Brooklyn Dodgers, not the Queens Dodgers. Stoneham begins to look to move the Giants. His minor league team is in Minneapolis, and like Milwaukee, they roll the dice and they build a structure. It was a rather small structure that could be expanded, and Stoneham likes Minneapolis. He really does like Minneapolis, and also Willie Mays played minor league baseball in Minneapolis. But O'Malley cuts the deal in Los Angeles, gets some real estate, builds his own stadium, and his franchise becomes the answer to the Denver Mint. Stoneham would go to San Francisco after O'Malley said, you should go to San Francisco. We'll keep the Brooklyn Dodgers, New York Giants rivalry alive, but we'll be in LA and San Francisco. Brooklyn was the second biggest revenue generator when O'Malley cut the LA deal behind the Yankees. San Francisco is a little different. There was a guy by the name of Matty Fox. He was a movie guy, and he was also getting into TV. And there was some form of cable TV back in the 1950s, and he came up with this idea called Skyatron. Skyatron would be a subscription-based television service. And he signs the San Francisco Giants, or the New York Giants, soon to be San Francisco. Horace Stoneham gives him $1 million. $1 million in baseball. I mean, the best players were making $75,000, $80,000 a year. He gives him $1 million. Exclusive deal on TV. And he basically says this: don't put your games on local TV. You got the $1 million guarantee. And Horace Stoneham says, $1 million guarantee. Takes the money. San Francisco did not have a game televised in the market until 1960. Skyatron never took off. It's all over in Brooklyn. Here's Gil Hodges in the on-deck circle. I love Los Angeles. I love San Francisco, and Bill Rigney's there, and Walt Alston is there. First game between the Giants and Dodgers, first of 22 that year, would be played in the Los Angeles Coliseum, which was not built for baseball at all. Had that high fence there. Other major league teams would come. 1960, the American League expanded to Los Angeles. The team would move to Anaheim, near Disneyland, in 1966. Charlie Finley moved his Kansas City A's to Oakland in 1968. The National League expanded to San Diego in 1969. Right now, in Anaheim, the owner of the Angels, Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, Artie Moreno, is looking, after his stadium deal blew up, maybe looking for a stadium in Long Beach, California, which the minor league Los Angeles Angels were headed to in 1942. The Oakland A's ownership, they're playing Oakland against Las Vegas in the stadium game. In San Diego, the team almost moved to Washington in 1974. So these other moves weren't all that strong. In fact, the Giants almost ended up in Toronto in 1976. So the Golden State is not gold to everyone. As you could see, Ray Kroc, the guy from McDonald's who bought the San Diego Padres and kept them in San Diego. The Padres owners in 1973 sold their team to Washington, DC interest. There's oddity in the 1974 baseball cards. Some of the baseball cards of the Padre players list Washington NL as the team. Some have San Diego. The reason why, nobody knew in the fall of 1973 where that team was going to be playing. But the Padres' move was rejected by the NL owners. And on January 25th, 1974, Ray Kroc told San Diego baseball fans, you deserve a break today at the Padres games as opposed to McDonald's. He buys the team. The Toronto Giants. This was going to be the uniform of the Toronto Giants in 1976. Candlestick Park was a miserable place, absolutely miserable place to watch a baseball game. Anybody go to Candlestick Park? What'd you think?
Terrible.
Were you there at night or during the day?
At night.
At night. You there too?
Start out in a t-shirt and end up in a parka.
Well, see, Horace Stoneham had a little bit of a drinking problem. And they took him out to Candlestick Point at about 10 o'clock in the morning. Said, we're going to build the ballpark here. And 10 o'clock in the morning, the wind blows the other way. And it's nice at 10 o'clock in the morning. 7 o'clock at night, it's not. The wind comes in this way. But they took him out there before he had a few. And took him out in the morning and said, this is where your ballpark's going to be. And that's how it ended up. So people decided not to go to Giants games. The Giants ownership sold the team to Toronto Interest. They were going to move the team to Toronto. But, well, there were people who got involved in the move, including George Moscone, the mayor of San Francisco. And they put together a group led by Bob Lurie, and they stayed. But they tried to move twice to San Jose. And that failed because San Jose voters said no to building a stadium. And yet somehow today they claim the San Jose territory. And Oakland can't move to San Jose because San Francisco has that territory. So all's not golden. Tampa also ended up, or Toronto ended up with the Blue Jays in 1977, the expansion team. This franchise is now on solid footing. There were attempts to move the team also to St. Petersburg, Florida. In Oakland, the local owners want a new stadium. That team almost ended up in Denver in 1980. Television and baseball. Sandy looks like he's signing the autograph for Mr. Ed, doesn't he? Television loved baseball. Absolutely loved baseball in the 1960s. Walter O'Malley appeared with the Rifleman star and the one-time Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in 1965 in the show Branded. Willie Davis acted in The Love Machine. Jerry Lewis's Which Way to the Front, The Flying Nun. John Roseborough was in Dragnet, 1966. Brooks Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, Experiment in Terror. Leo and Herman Munster, The Munsters. Leo, who never met a morning he liked, except if he had to play a game in the afternoon, is wandering through a park and he sees Herman Munster hitting fungos to his son, and they're going a long way because Herman's 7'6", 540 pounds. And he signs Herman to a contract, and then Herman gets a tryout, all that, and he doesn't make it because he's hurting other players. And so fast forward to the fall, he's kicking a football to his son, Eddie Wolfgang Munster. And Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, the general manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers, comes out of the bushes saying, I'm going to sign you. And Leo comes back out of the bushes. No, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. A whole show about the Dodgers. Jim Lefevre, who is here. Al Ferrara, who is here, who said, I knew I made it. My picture was on the baseball card. They're about ready to shrink Gilligan's head to LA Dodgers. Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Johnny Roseborough. Oh, before the Dodgers went out there, how many of you watched the Phil Silvers Bilko show? Nobody?
Phil Silvers was great. I didn't see the show, yeah.
Well, This is Steve Bilko. He played with the Los Angeles Angels minor league baseball team. And that's Sergeant Ernie Bilko, which I'm going to give you you want a Yogi story?
Sure.
Yeah, Yogi. Okay. One day, I do a baseball talk over at the museum. And Yogi came at the Yogi Berra Museum. Yogi came to all my talks. She used to pat me on the back, said, "Good job, kid, let's go eat." And that's what we do, we went and eat. And I said, "You were on the Bilko show?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Tell me, what were you and the other Yankees doing in the middle of Kansas at Fort Baxter?" "No, we did it in the Bronx." No, wait, the show took place on the show. The show took place at Fort Baxter, Kansas. "No, we did it in the Bronx. I left my house. I drove on the turnpike, went over the George Washington Bridge, went across Bronx Expressway, got off, and it was on Southern Boulevard." At that point, I knew Yogi had me. There was no way he was going to play ball with me, but that's the way Yogi was. He was right. It was in the Bronx. It was in the Bronx. Anyway, Nat Hiken wrote the Bilko show, and he was out in Los Angeles, and this was his favorite baseball player. He didn't have a favorite major league player. He had a favorite local baseball player. And he said, "That's a great name." Oh, by the way, Moose Stubing was the manager of the Anaheim Angels in the late 1980s. Anybody here watch The Love Boat?
Yeah.
You can admit it.
Oh, yeah.
Captain Stubing.
Oh.
Merrill Stubing. Merrill Stubing. So how did that come about? Well, easy. Aaron Spelling, who was the executive producer of Love Boat. I'm going through all the other shows. He was the self-proclaimed king of schlock. Went to the baseball encyclopedia. Used to pull names out of the baseball encyclopedia to name his characters. I asked Moose Stubing about it. I said, "Did you ever get money for it?" He said, "No, but I know it's me." Because that's what he was. Woody Strode, Kirk Douglas,
Gladiator.
Spartacus.
Yeah, sort of.
Spartacus with Bernie Schwartz as well. Tony Curtis. The NFL does come to Los Angeles in 1946. Daniel Reeves sees gold. Sees gold. I believe Los Angeles will become the greatest professional football town in the country. Maybe Dallas too. He moves the team under one condition. You have to sign Negro players. And the San Francisco 49ers would start in the All-America Football Conference in 1946 and join the NFL in 1950. But getting back to Daniel Reeves, it's very complicated. And here is Reeves going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in the 1970s. NFL owner said, "No, travel costs. Can't do it. Can't do it." And Reeves says, "I'm going to remove my team from pro football altogether. And you call this a National League? Well, you can consider the Cleveland Rams out of football." No major league team ever called the West Coast home. Air travel, early stages, 2,000 miles away from Chicago. Strong tradition for college football in LA, but none for pro football. Breaking the color barrier. He hires the two guys, Kenny Washington and Woody Strode. For 12 years, no black players in the National Football League. Getting a lease from the Los Angeles Coliseum would change pro football. Change it entirely. Black players had to come back to the league. Some owners, like the Washington owner, George Preston Marshall, who was a racist. Anybody here know of Maury Povich? You know, who's your father? He was once a legitimate newsman. His father, Shirley Povich, was the executive sports editor of the Washington Post. And he wrote a column one day, and he asks George Preston Marshall, the owner of the Washington team, "When are you going to hire a Negro player?" And his response was, when the Harlem Globetrotters hire a white guy, I'll hire a black guy. This would set off a chain of events. The NFL would allow a quota of black players, 4 per team, in the 1950s. And Irv Cross, who was a friend of mine, who passed away last year, I was talking to him about 2 years ago. I said, "How you doing?" All that other stuff. He said, "Fine." He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm doing Super Bowl, and I've decided I'm throwing the quota in there." He said, hold on a second. My first year was with Philadelphia in 1961. Irv also played with LA. said 1961. Let me think. And he comes up with the 4 black guys on the Philadelphia team. He said Tim Brown, this guy. Yeah, Ted Dean. Yeah, 4. 2 guys, 2 rooms. They roomed with one another. And that was the NFL quota. Lombardi, when he won the first Super Bowl, which was in Los Angeles, and wasn't called the Super Bowl, that was called the American Football League, National Football League World Championship game. It's a mouthful. Had 13 black players on this team, far and away more than anybody else. But there was this guy. This guy is the guy who got the NFL desegregated. His name was Hallie Harding. He was an athlete who turned journalist. He was the sports editor of the Los Angeles Tribune, and he took a microphone and basically said to the Coliseum commissioners, this place was built with federal funds and state funds. And you can't have a segregated team in here if everybody paid for the building. And he put pressure in the newspapers. And other media picked it up on the commissioners. He also said that this isn't the South. We don't have Jim Crow out here. And the commissioners listened to him. He noted that blacks had played a major part in World War II, including dying at the Battle of the Bulge. And he basically said that, hey, they helped build the Coliseum, and that it was singularly strange that no NFL team ever signed a player like Kenny Washington. Reeves then put out his news release. He's moving. The NFL color barrier is done. The NFL denies they ever had a color barrier. But there was also another team there, owned partly by Don Amici and Bob Hope, called the Los Angeles Dons, All-American Football Conference. Fernando Gonzalez III was a California businessman, longtime football fan, and this team should have made it when you think of their part owners, which included Don Amici, Bob Hope, Bing Crosby, Louis B. Mayer, but they didn't make it. People didn't come out to the games. Reeves didn't find the pot of gold in Los Angeles that he thought he did, and he takes in some partners from the Los Angeles Dons franchise, and the Dons and the Rams merge after the 1949 season. Television would change the NFL in Los Angeles. Admiral World Championship football game, Los Angeles Rams against the Cleveland Browns. 1949, Los Angeles Rams did rather well at the gate, 300,000 people. But next year they have a deal with Admiral TV. Anybody own an Admiral?
I remember the Admiral.
You remember the Admirals. Well, Admiral decided that they needed to sell TVs in Los Angeles. There were 2 stations on in Los Angeles and more were coming on. And they decided, hey, we could sell TVs with the Los Angeles Rams. Remember, no Lakers, no Clippers, no Kings, no Anaheim Ducks, no Dodgers, no Angels. There's nothing there except this team, the Rams. So let's sign them to a big contract, which they did. But what they found out was they didn't sell as many TVs as they hoped, and the Los Angeles Rams had half the number of people show up to the games. After that, the NFL commissioner, Burt Bell, said, no, we're going to black out all the home games, protect the home audience, protect the home team, and not have people watch the games for free. The blackout rule, debated in Washington, and the FCC to this day is suggesting to end it. The blackout rule is pretty simple. If a team doesn't sell out 72 hours prior to kickoff, their premium seats and luxury boxes, then the game could be blacked out, which is why you see all New York Jets games here, even though their games aren't sold out, because all the premium seats are sold out, are not sold out. Oh, this is a 30-year-old guy by the name of George Steinbrenner. And this is John McClendon, who is his coach with the Cleveland Pipers. The American Basketball League starts out because the National Basketball League stiffs Abe Saperstein, who owned the Harlem Globetrotters. And the Harlem Globetrotters kept the NBA alive in the 1950s with double headers, except in New York because they'd have 4 teams, half the league would be in. How many of you went to Madison Square Garden where you saw the double headers, right? You saw half the league, right? For the price of one. Wasn't a bad deal. Wasn't a bad deal at all. The NBA told Saperstein, we're going to give you the team in LA. But they didn't. Bob Short moved the Minneapolis Lakers to LA in 1960. Saperstein is really mad. He's going to get back at the NBA. And he forms the American Basketball League. It only lasts a year and a half. There were a couple innovations that he did that you see today, the three-point play. He had a 30-second shot clock, which they didn't adapt. But he also had a guy by the name of George M. Steinbrenner III, who was part of the league. He owned the Cleveland franchise. And John McClendon, who told me about George Steinbrenner years later, was fired by Steinbrenner. His next job was in Malaysia. Why Malaysia? As the head of teaching basketball in Malaysia, wanted to get as far away from George as humanly possible. Dick Barnett once told me, he said the day he read that George Steinbrenner was going to be the minority owner of the New York Yankees and not get really involved, he said, "What? People actually believe that?" Because Barnett played for his Cleveland team. San Francisco got the Philadelphia Warriors in 1962. The ABL failed in Long Beach. George Yardley was on that team. San Diego failed with 2 NBA franchises. The American Basketball Association failed in Los Angeles, Oakland, and San Diego. The San Francisco Warriors franchise was a nomadic franchise. They played games at a high school in Richmond, California, among other places. The team is now called the Golden State Warriors because the owner of the team back in 1971, Franklin Muley, decided he was going to split the games between San Diego and the Bay Area. That failed as well. Hockey finally. There's a bid to get a National Hockey League team in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, and this is after the war. But you got to remember one thing about the National Hockey League. It was controlled by the Norris family in Detroit. The Norris family owned the Detroit team. They owned the Chicago team. They owned Madison Square Garden, and they owned the Boston Garden. They had the absolute monopoly on hockey in the United States, and they didn't want outsiders from San Francisco, Los Angeles, or Cleveland. Los Angeles and San Francisco investors petitioned the National Hockey League to join the circuit in the 1940s. They were denied. The Western Hockey League said, we are going to claim Major League status, like the Pacific Coast League did. And we're going to start a rival big league hockey establishment in the 1960s. That scared the Norris family. All of a sudden, we're expanding by 6 teams. And the 6 teams included the San Francisco Oakland Seals and the Los Angeles Kings in 1967. And also they did it for TV. The WHL said, hey, listen, we got the teams in LA, we got teams in San Francisco. They're going to be our Keystone franchises. When the NHL took those teams, it kills the Western Hockey League. They still have Seattle, they still have Portland, Edmonton, Calgary, Vancouver, Victoria, San Diego, but they needed LA and San Francisco for TV purposes. It doesn't work, and the Western League would fall. The World Hockey Association was there. The Los Angeles Sharks failed. The WHA, as with the American Basketball Association, were both started in Southern California by a guy by the name of Dennis Murphy. Also, the World Football League started in Southern California. Super Bowl I, take a look at, here are the Packers and Green Bay. Lots of empty seats in Los Angeles. 1/3 of the stadium featured empty seats. The American Football League, National Football League World Championship game, played on January 15th, 1967. Game doesn't sell out. How many of you go to Super Bowl parties now? You go to Super Bowl party. How many of you gone to Super Bowl parties? Sure. How many of you bet on the Super Bowl in those boxes at the parties? The first party would take place, although some people had parties, but the first real party would take place on the Queen Mary in Long Beach. And that was the big party. Hey, Shelley, I know you're listening to me. Shelley Saltman was the president of the LA Kings and the LA Lakers the year Wilt was there when they won 33 in a row in the championship. And Shelley also put together the Bobby Riggs, Billie Jean King Network Spectacular. and was beaten up by Evel Knievel. So I know he's listening to me now because his ears are burning. He's got the burner phone and he's trying to call me. But 15 years from now, he'll talk to me. But Shelley tells me they have this big party on the, Shelley passed away 3 years ago, big party on the Queen Mary. Said anybody who is anybody in Hollywood was there. Dean Martin was there. And this person, that person, that person. They were all on the Queen Mary. And word leaked out about this party. And other people said, hey, wait a minute. If they can have a party, why can't we have a party? And now the Super Bowl party is almost as important as the Super Bowl itself, right? Teams come and go. The California Golden Seals ended up in Cleveland and then folded. No, this
was that?
I'm not even sure. It looks like Paul Schmier.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, Paul Schmier, defenseman. The list of teams that left and came back. California Golden Seals failed in Oakland. Team would move to Cleveland. The team would fold in Cleveland, but would combine with Minnesota in 1978. Part of that team came back to San Jose in 1991. The Los Angeles Rams moved to Anaheim, then to St. Louis, then back to LA, now in Inglewood, across the border from LA, across from LAX. The Oakland Raiders started out life in Minnesota, but that team jumped to the NFL. So they gave Oakland a franchise, but they didn't play in Oakland. They played in San Francisco and then went to Oakland. Then they went to LA, and then they were back to Oakland, and now they're in Las Vegas. 2 NBA teams failed in San Diego. One is now in Houston, the other in LA. The United States Football League had failures in LA and Oakland. The World Football League had a failure in Anaheim. The Los Angeles Dons in the AAFC failed. But the AAFC did create the San Francisco 49ers. And we'll leave you with the Olympics. Did LA save the modern Olympics in 1984? Yes or no? What do you think? The answer is yes. The Olympic movement was on the ropes. 1972, Munich Massacre. 1976, Montreal dead. 1980, the boycott. There were only 2 cities that bid for the 1984 Olympics back in 1977. Los Angeles and Tehran. And you know they weren't going to go to Iran, right? They weren't going to go. They were the only bidders. My friend Rennie Henry, his birthday was yesterday. I got to give him a call. Told him I'd call him this weekend. Wish him a happy birthday. He's 89 years old now. Told me he and Peter Ueberroth head to White House. And they're basically sitting in a room off the Oval Office waiting to meet with Jimmy Carter because they want to talk to him about gathering federal funds for the Los Angeles Olympics. But Carter blows them off. He's too busy. Thank you very much, said an aide. We'll be talking to you. Well, Peter Ueberroth takes a check for $100 and opens up a checking account for the Los Angeles Olympic Committee. And he would commercialize the Olympics. I'll give you an example. Eastman Kodak, the Kodak moment, right? $1 million they gave the Olympics. Peter said, and we used to call him PU shorthandedly. PU says to Kodak, I could do better. And they said, go ahead, try to do better. Well, he does better. Gets $5 million from Fuji Films. It becomes totally commercialized. And the other people are looking, saying, hey, wait, this is great. We'll get all these corps to pay and we'll get people to pay. The 1984 Games makes profit because they don't build anything except for a velodrome. And my friend Shelley was there along with the late Harry Usher and Peter Ueberroth and Rich Levin and Harvey Schiller and all these people who I still talk to if they're still alive to this day. Jeff Beard, all part of that. And they basically said, Peter didn't pay for anybody. He sold patriotism. Don't work for the Olympics, volunteer for the Olympics. And people did. The LA Games turned a profit, but the Warsaw Pact countries boycotted the game. Paying athletes starts in California in 2019. Pass the Fair Play, we'll start that again. Pass the Fair Pay to Play Act. In California, beginning in 2023, or that was the plan, student athletes would be able to sell their images for marketing purposes and make some money off their faces. Well, that happened 2 years ago in July of 2021 when the NCAA reluctantly said that college athletes could make money off of their faces, their images and likenesses. I was reading, I think it was Ohio State, the coach at Ohio State said that his athletes needed to be paid $13 million, and they were going to get $13 million. And you heard Nick Saban, the Alabama coach, talking about Jumbo Fisher at Texas A&M, saying that all his recruits this year were paid for. In Alabama, there's some sort of law where the boosters can't pay for the athletes. But they were the first in the nation to make sure that at least college football and basketball players can be paid. California today, there are 5 Major League Baseball teams, 3 NFL teams, 4 NBA teams, 3 NHL teams, 4 Major League Soccer teams, major college sports. Los Angeles was given the 2028 Olympics. No bidding, again, like in 32 and 84. Nobody wanted the 2028 games. LA did. They got the games. So LA has a lot of things going on, or rather California has a lot of things going on for them. Yeah, you could say that sports did change in California. Jackie Robinson. Well, Jackie Robinson was born in Georgia, but he was out in California. His brother Mac was a silver medalist behind Jesse Owens in 1936. Goes back, he's a street sweeper in Pasadena. He's trying to make a point. This is Mac Robinson, not Jesse. Jackie. 1937. He wants to show that he's as good as anybody else in
I
Pasadena.
don't know what a street sweeper is.
The guy who's a street sweeper. You know,
Okay, that's what I
the
thought
guy,
you meant.
the guy who drives the street sweeper.
No. In those days, they pushed the car.
They pushed the cart,
And
right?
had a
They pushed the
broom.
cart, right? But yeah, right. And he wore his Olympic uniform and the medal around his neck. And people said he was disturbing the peace, and he was ordered not to dress up as an Olympian to continue sweeping the streets. So that's California today. The rest of the story, the St. Louis Browns ended up in Baltimore. We know about George Steinbrenner, right? Everybody in the room know about George? Ended up being the Yankees owner.
Right.
The World Hockey League folded. The Los Angeles Coliseum continues to be the home of USC football. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any questions, any comments? The floor
Yeah, I
is
got a
all
question.
yours. Go ahead.
I remember the name, and you mentioned him, Maury Povich.